Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the pink CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is John Rubino, author of several books on the economy, including The Money Bubble, his website, dollarcollapse.com. Welcome back to the show, John.
Hey, Jim.
Some shocking admissions by the Saudis now about missing journalist Khashoggi. What have you heard, and what are the trade implications of this?
Yeah, this is one of the more bizarre stories that we've seen lately. It began when Saudi Arabia apparently decided to murder a Washington Post journalist. And they got him in the Turkish embassy, sent a hit squad in there, killed him, and we're just going to, I guess, secret the body out of the country and disappear. But the reporter had an Apple Watch on that was recording a lot of what went on, and that recording survived and got handed around by the Turkish government to other governments. And so Saudi Arabia, after initially denying everything, had to admit that they killed him. They said they're interrogating him and it went wrong, which obviously is a lie, but we'll see. And so now the big part of the story is that, or the geopolitical part of the story, is that the governments of the world are kind of required to respond to Saudi Arabia in some way, because you can't go around killing journalists unless you're Vladimir Putin. But anybody else kills journalists, they get punished for it. And even Trump is wrestling with the idea of some kind of sanction on Saudi Arabia. But of course, we're terrified of making Saudi Arabia mad because we need their oil, and we want them to buy our weapons. So we're wrestling with that, and Saudi Arabia is threatening to use oil as a weapon against anybody that sanctions them. So this has potentially big ramifications for the oil market. There was one article that came out today, and the headline was, $400 oil is possible if the U.S. sanctions Saudi Arabia. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but the idea that legitimate voices are talking about numbers like that has spooked the markets a bit. And so we'll see where this goes, but the potential, disruption of even $100 for a barrel of oil is pretty extreme right now, because we're an insanely over-leveraged society. So you give us any kind of a financial shock, and it can tip over the U.S. and by implication the global financial system very, very easily. So the Saudi Arabia thing is potentially a big deal in its own right, and definitely a big deal in the sense that it's one more thing to worry about in a world where there's already an awful lot to worry about.
Well, we know the Saudis will try to do things to punish you, because Canada, for criticizing them for jailing and potentially executing human rights activists, the Saudis did all kinds of bad things to Canada over it. So why wouldn't they do that to anybody else? Yeah.
I mean, they're on one level they're trying to modernize a bit and liberalize a bit, but on other levels they're still this nasty, crazy 12th century dictatorship. Oh, I hope they don't kill me for saying that.
Well, just don't go to one of their embassies.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to hide out here in Idaho with my guns until this blows over. But they're a primitive culture in a lot of ways. Let's say that. But they have a ton of oil, which makes them important, and that's a tricky dilemma for the relatively civilized part of the world, because you've got people who are on some levels by our standards crazy, but at the same time, they own the most important commodity in the world. They own a big chunk of the most important commodity in the world, and they can disrupt the global financial system very easily by acting irrationally. So we got to treat them right, or treat them, the way you would treat somebody who's potentially dangerous but still necessary for some reason. And that's the dilemma that faces the world's governments right now. I still don't see how you avoid some kind of consequence from a political standpoint, because if you don't do it, that becomes a huge issue in whatever election you've got coming up, right? That the idea that your opponent can stand up in a debate and say, you know what, Saudi Arabia murdered a Washington Post journalist, and what did you do? Nothing. That's got to be terrifying to any politician, and Trump among them. So I think we got to do something, but I have no idea what we'll do.
Well, isn't the U.S. self-sufficient in oil? You're exporting it.
You would think. We're oil exporters. So it's not clear why we need Saudi Arabia. But that you'd have to ask an oil expert about that, because it seems to me that what you just said was true. If we're exporting something, then we have all we need, right? Domestically.
Well, both Canada and the U.S., though, are selling a huge amount of arms to Saudi Arabia right now, and they don't want those sales canceled because it would mean thousands of people being laid off. Okay, that's a big part of it, too. Yeah, that's true, because also in the election, if you do something that gets a Boeing plant or a Rockwell plant or something like that shut down, or General Dynamics of stock tanks, and you get blamed for it, there are some key states where that's not going to play very well. And so that's also a problem. So, yeah, Saudi Arabia is just, it's got us coming and going. No matter what we do, it's going to be a problem for the U.S. government going forward. What about the major companies that withdrew from their diversification convention?
Yeah, well, that's less surprising and less contentious if you're a company, because you kind of have to do that. You can't go meet with Saudi Arabia right after they kill a journalist, because the ramifications of that, the consequences of that for you, would be much, much more serious than you as a private sector company pulling out of a conference. So it's not at all a surprise that that's happening. And it would be a surprise if a lot of U.S. companies just, went to the upcoming conference and then just stayed in touch with Saudi Arabia as they have been, because that leaves them open to a lot of really bad press and a lot, and therefore consequences at the next shareholders meeting, which they want to avoid. They don't want to have people stand up and accuse them of human rights violations. And that's what they would be looking at if they stayed in bed with somebody like Saudi Arabia. Well,
as a human, I would be nervous about doing business with a country that's so cavalier about human life. What if I go in to negotiate a deal, they don't like my stand, and they haul me off into their nearest embassy and whack me? Yeah. I think this was a fairly special case, but still, when people start killing other people, you never know if you're next if you're hanging out with them, right? So you want to avoid situations where there's not a camera on you and you don't have bodyguards when you're doing things with Saudi Arabia in the future, I guess. We'll have more with John Rubino right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. Work programs are underway in Finland and Canada. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol ADD, on Frankfurt symbol 82A1, and the OTCQB symbol ASDZF. Please visit our website arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Welcome back. We're speaking with John Rubino. John, the powerhouse of the European Union, Germany, may have some political fallout happening. And of course, if that affects their economy, that could also have a worldwide effect.
Yeah, Germany, led by Angela Merkel, has been this pillar of the European Union and of the Eurozone. Basically, Germany calls the tune in both of those organizations, and Merkel calls the tune in Germany, but she's part of a coalition. Her government is part of a coalition. And the coalition partner of Merkel's party just got smacked in an election in their home state of Bavaria, where they didn't just lose ground to one fringe party on one side of the spectrum. They lost ground to the Greens on the far left and the far right party, whose name I forget, on the right. And so the middle is being squeezed. That party that Angela Merkel counts on for her government stability can no longer necessarily fill that role. And that means Angela Merkel's party, which doesn't have an absolute majority, so it can't rule by itself. It has to cut deals with other parties. But it's not clear how that works going forward, because both the right and the left are strong enough to be coalition partners, but how do you do that if you're Angela Merkel? You know, the Green Party is basically a socialist party that wants completely open borders. And Angela Merkel seems to like open borders too, but that's a political loser at the national level. And the far right party is anathema to a lot of her voters, because even though it probably isn't a neo-fascist party, you know, some of these right-wing parties in Europe have roots in racist, sexist, quasi-fascist philosophies, but they've moderated, like the National Front in France is no longer a bunch of crazies like it once was. And probably the same is true for the German right-wing party, but still, it's a really hard coalition building process if those two, you know, Angela Merkel's party and the far right-wing party in Germany are going to try to make a government. So the gist of this story is that German politics might be thrown into turmoil by what's happening right now, and Angela Merkel might be tossed out of power. And with Europe already in, chaos is too strong a word, but only slightly too strong, because you've got Italy, the biggest debtor nation in the Eurozone, basically refusing to live by the budget guidelines of the Eurozone, and the European Central Bank then refusing to buy Italian bonds at extremely favorable prices like it used to do. So now Italy's interest rates are going up, which will just blow their budget completely out of the water, and potentially bring them to the level, of defaulting on some of their debt. So the Eurozone has the prospect of its biggest debtor nation defaulting in some way in the not-too-distant future. And it also has the prospect of other elections that are coming up bringing into power populist governments similar to Italy's. And while all this is going on, it's got some Eastern European members, in the EU at least, who don't want to go along with the EU's immigration policies. They're closing their borders to new immigrants, and the EU is threatening to punish them, and they're coming back and saying that they'll leave if that's what it comes to. And so you've got stuff going on in Europe that really requires a strong center, run by a respected politician. And Angela Merkel has been that up till now, but, let her position get more and more precarious. And it's not clear how all this periphery stuff in the Eurozone plays out, because you could easily see a financial crisis in one of these countries leading to the necessity of, for instance, a euro devaluation to keep Italy or somebody like that in the Eurozone, which then sends the European bond market into turmoil, which sends the global bond market into turmoil. It goes on like that very easily, step by step, if you start with chaos in the center. So that's a big deal. we should definitely be watching what happens in Europe and with Angela Merkel in particular, and be ready for the fallout of something like that. If they have to aggressively devalue the world's second most important currency, that has ramifications everywhere for the dollar and for U.S. stocks and for the gold market and global bonds. So pay attention to that one. It's potentially a big deal coming out of left field right now.
Well, wouldn't Italy and Greece love a lower valued euro because it would be cheaper for them to pay back their debt to Germany?
Well, that's the only way they're going to stay in the Eurozone in the long run if it's dramatically devalued. Because that's how they used to do it. You know, they had their own currencies back in the day, and they would run up unsustainable debts, and then have a mini financial crisis and then devalue their currency, lop some zeros off, and then go on as before, you know, running up more debts. They can't do that under the euro because Germany wants a stable currency. So either Italy and potentially Spain and potentially Portugal and definitely Greece again blow up and end up having to leave the Eurozone, or they have to devalue the euro. That's basically their only two choices. And that's with other things being equal in the big countries like Germany and France. Now, throw one of those countries into political turmoil where you might get an anti-euro or an anti-austerity or an anti-immigration government coming in, and then all bets are off. So I think that in the coming crisis, one of the things they'll all eventually agree on is that they got to devalue the euro. And that means, from the point of view of us in the U.S., that means the U.S. dollar goes up versus the euro, which hurts our trade, which causes us trouble, you know, and so we don't escape the problems of the Eurozone. In fact, we're impacted really dramatically by them. So I think this easily becomes a global problem. We'll just have to see.
Does it help that we have a new U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreement?
You know what? That's a good thing in and of itself because it stabilizes North America. We aren't fighting anymore among ourselves, and we're able to cooperate. I don't know the details of the agreement and whether it's better for the U.S. or better for Canada or better for Mexico or kind of a wash. Or I have no idea. I haven't been.
Everybody's complaining that they didn't get the deal they want, so maybe it's a good deal.
Yeah, if everybody's complaining, it's probably a sign that they made the compromises they had to make, and now they're just going to move forward. Because you know, Trump is under a lot of pressure time-wise because we've got a midterm congressional election coming up here. And right now, it looks like there's a decent chance the Democrats take back at least one house of Congress, which would just hamstring the government. Democrats running, for instance, the House of Representatives would instantly start investigating Trump and trying to impeach the Supreme Court nominee that he just got passed, and generally blocking funding for most of what Trump wants to do. And he doesn't want that to happen, obviously. You know, that's a catastrophe from his point of view. So he doesn't want a bunch of trade war stuff hanging over the country during this upcoming election. So he has a lot of time incentive now to finish this thing quickly. And he did North America. And now there's a lot of time pressure on China, or on Trump and China. Because the last thing Trump wants is a trade war to blow up 2 weeks before the election and companies start closing here and people be thrown out of work. He truly doesn't want that. And obviously China knows it. So you would think there's some real hardball negotiating going on right now at the level below the executive, in which China's seeing what it can get out of Trump in return for a deal before the election.
Didn't China cooperate with the U.S. in trying to get North Korea on side, and wasn't that something that was part of the whole trade negotiation?
I don't know. I have no idea what happened in the background on the North Korea thing. But it's in China's interest to take North Korea off of their plate, right? You don't want that hanging over your head either if you're China. So I would think that they did what they felt like they could to bring North Korea into line, and it seems to have worked to an extent. I mean, North and South Korea seem to be getting along. The U.S. is talking about another meeting with North Korea. So it's possible that that's going to get resolved in some way that satisfies most people. I don't know. The North Korea thing, I don't completely understand because on both sides are pretty opaque. And the China thing also. China has a lot of internal issues that it's got to deal with. The chief among them being that they've got hundreds of millions of people who need good jobs. And they've got a history within living memory of civil unrest leading to civil war, leading to revolution. And they'll do anything they have to do to keep that from happening. So that animates a lot of their crazier stuff that they do domestically, where supposedly they've got 1 million Muslims locked up in internment camps right now because they've defined Islam as a mental disorder. And the point of that is to tamp down civil unrest. So China is not completely free to act, at least in their own mind. They feel like they're under a lot of pressure to keep growing because the minute they stop growing, they risk a revolution. So they can only give up a certain number of things to Trump. They can't just write an across-the-board free trade agreement in which we have total access to their markets, and they give up some of the preferential stuff that they've gotten up until now, because that's a big risk for them. So it's a tricky situation. Having said all that, Trump is right that China's been taking advantage of things. They steal our intellectual property, and they demand that companies who want to operate in China give up a lot of their proprietary technology and stuff like that. And we just found out lately that they had embedded a little tiny monitoring chip on electronic equipment that is in our Defense Department and in the networks of some of our big corporations. So there are a lot of reasons to want to negotiate a fair trade agreement with China. It's just not easy to do because neither side can give up as much as it might take to get the deal done.
We'll have more with John Rubino right after this.
Vatic Ventures Corp. is a potash exploration company focused on the Korat Basin in Thailand, the world's largest undeveloped potash resource. Vatic's management has extensive potash exploration and development experience in Thailand. Vatic will have marketing advantage compared to Western producers. Drill program commences this spring. Vatic trades on the TSX Venture, symbol VCV, and on Frankfurt, symbol V8V2. Visit our website, vaticventures.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with John Rubino. John, after the mini meltdown on the stock markets last week, we saw gold make a nice little rally on Thursday. What do you expect is going to happen with gold?
Well, gold's in an interesting spot because the situation in the futures market has gotten really extreme with speculators extremely short, which is highly unusual. Usually they're long. But instead, they're betting that gold will go down from here in a fairly big way, and they tend to be wrong at turning points. So you've got the potential for a short squeeze right now in gold, in which if gold goes up a bit, these traders who are basically momentum and emotion traders will have to close out their short positions. They'll kind of be forced to by their own temperaments and by the black box trading systems that a lot of them use. And that's a lot of buying pressure because the short position is so huge. And that would push up the price of gold. And we're seeing that happen lately. Gold wants to go up now, right? It just has an upward bias, and probably a lot of that is speculators getting out of their short positions that didn't work out for them. At the same time, you've got a really stressful world, like we were talking about. You got oil being suddenly a really dangerous market. You've got Europe potentially politically unstable now. You've got U.S. interest rates going up, which are causing U.S. stocks to fall. And you've got U.S. political uncertainty with elections coming up that could give us a gridlocked government. along with a whole bunch of investigations and potential impeachment kinds of stuff. So all of that creates a lot of uncertainty, and gold tends to do well in uncertainty because gold is certain, you know. It's been valuable for 3,000 years, and it's absolutely certain. Barring some kind of a, alchemical technology that comes along that lets you make gold out of seawater, gold is going to hold its value going forward. And that is something that no other asset in the world can say with that kind of certainty. So in uncertain times, people tend to allocate a little more of their capital to certain things, like gold. And so that's what we're seeing now as well. Things get uncertain, you buy gold. When gold starts going up, you buy silver because it gets pulled along. So the precious metals markets are looking pretty good right now. But of course, you never know until after the fact if moves like we saw in the last week are the beginning of a new rip-roaring bull market or just a little squiggle in an ongoing bear market. But a year from now, we'll be able to look back and say, okay, that time in October was nothing much, didn't matter in the scheme of things, or it was the beginning of this great run that we've been enjoying. And you know which one I want. I think eventually the great run in gold and silver will come. And it would be nice if this was it.
Elon Musk and his battles with the SEC, how do you think that's going to pan out?
Elon Musk is such an interesting character because he is a super genius. He's done an amazing number of things that have changed the world. One of which is he basically created the electric car market or turned it into a mainstream market. You know, you had electric cars before Tesla came along, but they were novelties, not something that the average family would buy. And now the new relatively affordable Tesla model is outselling most other mainstream internal combustion engine sedans in the world. That's a big deal. So on that front, he's a revolutionary who's done very cool stuff. The flip side is that he's really erratic. You know, he says crazy things and he does things that are either borderline illegal or outright fraud, and he's getting punished for some of that. So it's clear that the punishment hasn't ended yet. You know, the legal consequences of those tweets when he said he had funding secured for an LBO, and that turned out not to be true. That's something that's very illegal for a CEO to do. It cost the shorts in that stock billions of dollars over the course of a week. So the consequences of that are still coming. And then the final piece of the puzzle is Tesla itself, which is a widely shorted stock. I'm shorted, by the way, but not so much anymore. I've closed out a lot of shorts at a profit, and still have some, but not as many as before. But it has dramatically growing sales, but it's kind of almost out of money, and it's going to have to go back to the financial markets and borrow more if it wants to ramp up production from here. It wants, they want to build a Chinese factory, and they need to increase the size of their existing factory if they want to bring on new models and stuff. They need billions of dollars of capital, and it's not clear how they get those billions of dollars of capital with their junk bonds down. You know, their existing junk bonds are trading below par, which means if they were to issue more junk bonds, they would have to pay a higher interest rate. And that would give them even more negative cash flow. If they issue stock, that would whack the stock price, which would probably be a better choice for their long-term survival. They would just start the next run with a lower stock price. But that's a tough thing to do when you own a big chunk of the stock like management does, and it would kind of be seen as a betrayal of their existing investors if they smack the stock price down in order to raise capital. So it's not clear where they get the money. And if they don't get the money, they've got a lot of debt coming due that they won't be able to pay off, and they'll have a cash crunch and maybe even default on some of their debt. You know, bankruptcy is not out of the question just based on those numbers. If you just look at the trend in free cash flow and debt service and all the things that a bond analyst would look at, it's not pretty. So it's going to be really interesting for Tesla over the next year as they bring out revolutionary products. And their car finally becomes a mainstream car. You know, electric cars become mainstream thanks to them, but they face huge amounts of new competition, serious pressure on their finances, maybe a cash flow crisis, and all at the same time. So I don't really know how it's going to play out. They could survive, or they could go bankrupt, or they could muddle through in some as yet unknown way. But it's going to be really dramatic for them no matter what.
Well, just because you're one of the first people is no sign of success. Kodak invented digital photography. Where are they today?
Yeah. Remember People Express airline?
Yeah.
Back when? That was the very first discount airline, and they were so hot. They were a household name, and then they went bankrupt in a couple of years. So yeah, the bleeding edge of a new technology is frequently the wrong place to be.
John, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Sure thing, Jim.
My guest has been John Rubino, author of several books on the economy, including The Money Bubble, his website, dollarcollapse.com. If you have any questions for John or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.